They thought the sky belonged to them, until an invisible eye began watching their every move. In the summer of 1940, high above the English Channel, German pilots flew with a confidence that had already crushed much of Europe beneath their wings. Poland had fallen in weeks, France in mere days, and now only Britain stood defiant against Adolf Hitler's expanding empire. Inside the cockpits of Luftwaffe bombers and Messerschmitt fighters, crews believed this mission would be no different. Their commanders had promised them that the Royal Air Force was weak, disorganized, and on the verge of collapse. What they did not know, what they could not even imagine, was that Britain had built a secret shield, a technological network so advanced it would quietly rewrite the future of warfare. As the German formations crossed the coastline, something strange began to happen. Before they even saw British fighters, before anti-aircraft guns fired a single shell, the RAF was already waiting, watching, calculating, preparing. Along Britain's southern shore stood a chain of tall steel towers, some rising over 300 feet into the air. To the untrained eye, they looked like ordinary radio masts, harmless structures scattered across the countryside. But these towers were part of Chain Home, the world's first fully operational radar defense system. Using radio waves, Britain could detect incoming aircraft from over 100 miles away. Every approaching formation appeared as a pulse on glowing screens inside dimly lit operations rooms, where young operators, many of them women barely out of school, tracked the enemy with quiet precision. Information flowed rapidly from radar stations to Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory. There, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding orchestrated a defense unlike anything the world had seen. Instead of wasting fuel on endless patrols, British fighters stayed grounded until the exact moment they were needed. Then, with engines roaring to life, Hurricanes and Spitfires climbed directly into the path of the incoming raids. To German pilots, it felt almost supernatural. Again and again, the British fighters appeared exactly where they shouldn't have been. Some Luftwaffe crews began whispering that the British must have spies within German ranks. Others suspected hidden observation posts along the coast. Few considered the possibility that technology itself had turned against them. On July 10, 1940, the Battle of Britain truly began. Waves of German aircraft targeted shipping convoys and coastal installations, hoping to lure the RAF into a decisive fight. Early encounters were brutal. Dogfights twisted across the sky in spirals of smoke and tracer fire. Pilots experienced combat at distances so close they could see the fear or determination in each other's eyes. Yet beneath the chaos, Britain's system held firm. Radar detected the raids, controllers plotted their course, squadrons intercepted with chilling efficiency. One German bomber gunner later recalled his shock when British fighters arrived as if summoned by magic. Losses began to mount. Still, Luftwaffe leadership remained confident. Hermann Göring, head of the German Air Force, believed sheer numbers would overwhelm British resistance. He ordered larger assaults, determined to destroy Fighter Command on the ground. Airfields became primary targets, bombs cratered runways, hangars burned, and precious aircraft were reduced to twisted metal. For a moment, it seemed the German strategy might succeed. British pilots were exhausted, some flying 5 sorties a day. Many never returned. Yet the radar towers remained standing, and that fact would prove decisive. German intelligence had underestimated their importance. Some officers assumed the towers were civilian communication structures and not worth prioritizing. Others believed the RAF was already beaten and saw no need to focus on unfamiliar technology. This miscalculation allowed Britain's invisible shield to survive the very weeks it was needed most. Inside Fighter Command's operations rooms, tension never eased. Giant map tables displayed miniature aircraft markers pushed forward by members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force using long wooden sticks. Telephones rang constantly. Controllers spoke in calm, measured tones that hid the life-or-death stakes of every decision.
Squadron scramble. With those words, pilots sprinted toward waiting fighters, hearts pounding as mechanics pulled away wheel chocks. Within minutes, they were airborne, climbing through cloud layers toward enemy formations already tracked miles away. For the Luftwaffe, the psychological toll grew heavier with each mission. Pilots had trained for visibility, for enemies they could see and outmaneuver. But how do you fight an opponent who always knows you're coming? Rumors spread through German briefing rooms. Some airmen joked nervously about British death rays. Others simply focused on survival. Then came August 13, 1940, Adlertag, or Eagle Day. Goering launched what he believed would be the knockout blow. Hundreds of bombers, escorted by fighters, surged toward Britain in coordinated waves. The sky thundered with engines. From the ground, civilians watched contrails weave overhead like white scars across the blue. Radar stations detected the buildup almost immediately. Dowding's network responded with disciplined urgency, sending squadrons into carefully timed interceptions designed to break apart the massive formations. The battles that followed were among the fiercest of the entire campaign. Aircraft collided mid-air. Parachutes blossomed against pillars of smoke. The channel below filled with wreckage. German crews pressed forward with courage, but many never reached their targets. Those who did often found defenses already waiting. After Eagle Day, something shifted within the Luftwaffe. Confidence gave way to unease. Reports described relentless British resistance. Fighter command, supposedly near destruction, continued to rise and fight. German planners struggled to understand why their attacks were anticipated so accurately. They increased pressure on radar stations briefly, damaging a few installations, but the assaults were inconsistent and quickly abandoned in favor of airfield attacks. It was a costly mistake. Britain repaired damaged towers with remarkable speed, sometimes within hours, ensuring the detection network never fully went dark. Meanwhile, British scientists and engineers worked quietly behind the scenes, refining radar accuracy and integrating it with ground observers from the Royal Observer Corps. Even if low-flying aircraft slipped beneath radar beams, human eyes often caught them. It was a seamless fusion of machine and manpower, years ahead of its time. For young British pilots, radar meant opportunity, the chance to meet the enemy in favorable terms instead of wandering blindly through endless sky. One Spitfire pilot later said, "We were never alone. Someone always knew where the enemy was." Yet victory was far from certain. By late August, fighter command was stretched to its limits. Airfields in southern England bore the scars of constant bombardment. Pilots slept beside their aircraft, too tired to return home. Replacement pilots arrived with minimal training, sometimes surviving days. Every loss hurt. Every scramble could be the last. Then came early September 1940, when Hitler made a decision that would alter the course of the battle. After a German raid accidentally bombed London, Britain retaliated with a strike on Berlin. Enraged, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to shift focus from RAF infrastructure to Britain's cities. The Blitz had begun. Night after night, bombers droned toward London, their paths once again detected by radar. Fires illuminated the capital while civilians sheltered underground. Militarily, however, the change granted fighter command a critical reprieve. Airfields had time to recover. Runways were repaired. Squadrons regrouped. The invisible shield still stood. German pilots, now flying deeper into defended territory, continued to encounter British fighters with unsettling regularity. Some began to suspect that Britain possessed technology beyond anything Germany had deployed. They were right, but by the time the realization spread, the window for easy victory had already closed. Autumn approached, bringing harsher weather and shorter days. The prospect of invading Britain, Operation Sea Lion, depended entirely on air superiority, and that superiority remained out of reach. On July 10, 1940, the Battle of Britain is generally considered to have ended. Germany had failed to destroy the RAF. For the first time in the war, Hitler's forces had been stopped. Radar did not win the battle alone. Courage, leadership, industrial effort, and sacrifice all played their roles, but without that silent network of towers, the outcome might have been very different. Years later, captured German officers admitted their astonishment upon learning how early they had been detected during those missions. What felt like British intuition was in truth the birth of modern air defense. The sky had changed forever. Technology turned invisibility into vision, uncertainty into strategy, and as those German pilots flew home, fewer each time, they carried with them a haunting realization. Britain had been watching all along.
The orders were clear. Gain control of the skies, or the invasion dies. By the autumn of 1940, the German High Command faced a reality it had never planned for. Britain was still fighting and winning. Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's proposed amphibious invasion of the British Isles, depended entirely on one condition: the Luftwaffe had to destroy the Royal Air Force. Without air superiority, thousands of German troops crossing the English Channel would become easy targets for British ships and aircraft. Yet every day, that condition drifted further out of reach. Inside Luftwaffe headquarters, maps once covered in confident arrows now told a different story. Loss reports grew longer. Replacement aircraft could be built, but experienced pilots could not. Many who had survived the lightning campaigns in Poland and France were now gone, swallowed by the cold waters of the Channel or captured on English soil. German pilots began each mission with a tension they had never known before. The element of surprise, once their greatest weapon, had vanished. Even before engines roared to full power on French airfields, many suspected that somewhere across the water, British radar operators were already tracking their preparations. And more often than not, they were right. In dim operations rooms, glowing cathode screens flickered with signals as controllers traced the gathering formations. Information moved with astonishing speed through telephone lines, linking radar stations, observer posts, and fighter command. Within minutes, British squadrons were climbing into the sky, perfectly positioned to intercept. To the Luftwaffe, it felt as though Britain could read their intentions. But technology alone does not fight wars, people do. On both sides, young men barely in their 20s carried the burden of history in fragile machines of aluminum and steel. German bomber crews flew long, exposed routes over hostile territory, knowing that if their aircraft went down, survival chances were slim. RAF pilots, meanwhile, scrambled repeatedly throughout the day, adrenaline surging each time the alarm bell rang. Some suffered from what doctors would later recognize as extreme combat fatigue, yet they continued flying. The battle had become one of endurance as much as strategy. September turned into October, and the Luftwaffe intensified night bombing. Darkness offered protection from British fighters, but it introduced a new enemy: navigation itself. Without modern GPS, crews relied on dead reckoning, radio signals, and visual landmarks often hidden beneath cloud. Bombing accuracy dropped sharply. Entire neighborhoods were devastated, yet critical military targets frequently escaped serious damage. Britain, battered but unbroken, adapted quickly. Searchlights pierced the darkness, anti-aircraft guns created lethal barriers of exploding shells, and airborne interception radar, still experimental but improving, allowed certain British night fighters to hunt bombers in the black sky. German crews who once feared daylight interceptions now dreaded the unseen threats lurking after sunset. Meanwhile, British morale hardened rather than collapsed. London burned, Coventry suffered catastrophic destruction, and countless families lost homes, but surrender never came. Prime Minister Churchill's speeches echoed across radios, transforming survival into defiance. Factories continued producing aircraft at a staggering pace.
Damaged fighters were repaired overnight and returned to combat with patched wings and fresh paint barely dry. Every restored plane represented another obstacle the Luftwaffe had failed to eliminate. Within German command circles, frustration quietly grew. Hermann Göring had promised victory. Instead, he faced questions he could not easily answer. Why was the fighter command still operational? Why were British responses so coordinated? Some intelligence officers began revisiting earlier reconnaissance photographs, finally recognizing the significance of the tall coastal towers they had largely ignored. Radar, still a relatively unfamiliar concept to many military planners, had given Britain a decisive informational advantage. Destroying it now would be far more difficult. The moment for an easy strike had passed months earlier. As weather worsened, conditions over the Channel became unpredictable. Sudden fog, heavy winds, and freezing temperatures complicated flight operations. Aircraft icing threatened engines and wings. Missions were delayed or aborted altogether. Time, once Germany's ally during its rapid conquests, had turned into an adversary. Every passing week allowed Britain to strengthen defenses further. For German pilots, psychological strain deepened. Veterans spoke less during briefings. The swagger that had characterized early campaigns faded into professional caution. Escort fighters struggled with limited fuel, often forced to turn back before bombers reached safety on the return journey. Those final miles became the most dangerous. British fighters waited for exactly that moment to strike. Some German airmen later described scanning the horizon constantly, expecting Spitfires to appear at any second. Yet the battle was never one-sided. British losses were severe, and the margin between survival and collapse remained painfully thin. Airfields were cratered repeatedly. Training programs rushed inexperienced pilots into combat. Commonwealth forces, pilots from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other occupied nations, joined the defense, bringing both skill and a fierce determination to fight back against Nazi expansion. Their presence turned the RAF into an international shield guarding Britain's skies. By late October, German planners confronted the unavoidable. Air superiority would not be achieved before winter. Without it, Operation Sea Lion became little more than a theoretical exercise. Barges assembled along European coastlines stood idle, vulnerable to British attack. Quietly, the invasion was postponed indefinitely. Though bombing would continue for months, the decisive moment had passed. For the first time since the war began, Hitler redirected his strategic gaze. Attention shifted eastward towards the vast territories of the Soviet Union. Preparations for Operation Barbarossa gathered momentum, setting the stage for an even larger and more brutal conflict. In this sense, the failure over Britain did more than prevent an invasion. It altered the trajectory of the entire war. After the conflict, captured German officers spoke with surprising candor. Many admitted they had underestimated both British resilience and the revolutionary power of radar-guided defense. What they had encountered was not merely resistance, but a new model of warfare, one where information moved faster than aircraft, where detection replaced guesswork, and where coordination multiplied the strength of limited resources. Historians would later view the Battle of Britain as a turning point not only strategically but technologically. Radar became the ancestor of modern surveillance systems that now span oceans and orbit the Earth in satellites. The concept was simple yet transformative. See the threat early, respond efficiently, conserve strength. Nations around the world studied the lesson carefully. For the pilots who lived through it, however, the legacy was far more personal. Many carried memories of contrails twisting above sunlit clouds, of radio calls cut short by static, of empty chairs in mess halls once filled with laughter. Survival felt more like chance than victory. When spring returned in 1941, Britain still stood, scarred, exhausted, but undefeated. The Luftwaffe had failed to break it. German pilots who once believed the campaign would last weeks now understood they had been part of a battle that reshaped history. Some would go on to fight over the deserts of North Africa or the frozen expanses of Russia. Others would never fly again. Looking back, one truth becomes unmistakable. Wars are not decided on strength alone. They are decided on adaptation, by the ability to recognize a changing battlefield before it is too late. In 1940, Britain adapted faster. Its invisible eyes watched the horizon, its controllers guided defenders with mathematical precision, and its people refused to yield. And so the sky, once expected to herald Germany's final victory in Western Europe, instead became the place where that momentum was first stopped. The moment German bombers turned back, unable to dominate the air, the myth of unstoppable conquest began to fracture. High above the clouds, where engines once thundered with certainty, a quieter realization settled in. The future of war had arrived unseen, carried on radio waves, and those who failed to understand it would forever be flying blind.